So, as I know you're well aware that in a moment like this, I prefer to go with the Federal Register or the Congressional Record to see what the official information for the day is, because most likely that would be what would be underwriting the sort of public good, the public trust, so to speak. And I have a sentimentality, right? But that's not what came up on my radar today. That is not what come up. What do I have here? The first responses concerning October 31st of 2012. It says here, a version of this article appears in print on October 31st, 2012, Section A, page 4 of the New York edition, with the headline, Taliban hit a region seen as safest for Afghans. Wow. Well, if you're talking about safety in an area like this, and they hit the safest region on that day, they literally have a picture of a boy and his donkey along the edge of a potato field in Afghanistan, along a road that leads to the nation's largest iron ore mine. Let me ask you a question. Between, when was that, May? June of 2010 and October of 2012, what happened to the trillions of dollars of mineral wealth that had been identified as being present in Afghanistan? Does anybody remember that? Class, does anybody remember? Does anybody remember when early to middle of 2010 it was said that there was 1.3 trillion dollars worth of mineral wealth that had been identified in Afghanistan? That there had been some form of geological survey that had been made public that revealed Afghanistan had $1.3 trillion of mineral wealth. Now, I did some research on this a little later. Presumably, there had been some old surveys by the Soviets that had occurred in Afghanistan that had identified different areas rich with minerals of different kinds. Presumably, at some period of time, another survey was done. But then that information was hushed up. And the reference points, at least as of early 2019, late 2018 to early 2019, referred back to those old Soviet surveys. Now, this wants you to see this picture of this beautiful potato field on the way to a iron ore mine, but it's not just iron ore we're talking about, is it? What is the current anticipation or expectation of valuation on what had previously been identified as $1.3 trillion worth of mineral wealth in Afghanistan by the middle of 2010? Does anybody know? Will it make a difference in terms of what is the identified valuation of that mineral wealth based upon the withdrawal of the American military as opposed to who's there now? Let me ask you, do you think that information is in this other document I found? October 31st, 2012, Brookings Afghanistan Index also included selected data on Pakistan. 38 pages, 2 of which are very nicely laid out table of contents. Got some graphs, some charts, lots of numbers, lots of bar graphs, a couple line graphs. I see, got the color shading. Rule of law indicators. And what happens to a rule of law indicator if it goes missing for 7 years? Can it be determined to be dead? You do not think there might have been a direct relationship between a third-party auditor of the Department of State's data broker act or data broker compliance and a index on Afghanistan put out by the Brookings Institute? Okay, let me ask you a question. The day before that 7th year, I wrote what would have been a follow-up report to a formal request I made that Congress investigate the activities of the former Secretary of State. It just so happens that Secretary of State would have been the Secretary of State at the time the Brookings Institute was releasing this Afghanistan index? This is a very important question. Would that have qualified as a derivative reporting? You see, technically, they never responded to me, so I had nobody to actually send that follow-up report to. But I made a public posting on my blog at the time. I have absolutely no indication that anybody has actually seen my blog. Do I suspect it has been illegally surveilled? Yes, I do. Do I suspect that it's actually been stolen and used in illegal securities underwriting, including to aid and abet the same entities that I requested be investigated for their relationship with organized crime? Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty certain that's why I'm kidnapped right now, right? But regardless, there's that other exigency, which is that I have this now, today. And if somebody did what I suspect they've been doing, which is staggering, you know, like the Staggers Act. You guys ever heard of that? Have you ever heard of the Staggers Act? I mean, you actually should have heard of the Staggers Act because the 40th anniversary of very important information relating directly to the Staggers Act came due in February of this year. Right? And we would be in a very different position today, right now, if they had let us get to the next day instead of cutting it off at, what was that, 39 years and 364 days? But I did this thing where I had a 2-month anticipation. So I did my own report 2 months before the 40th anniversary. And the ironic thing is, right, you already know some of these securities that are 40 years actually mature a month, sometimes 2 months before the actual date of due. So it's also very possible that I actually made the deadline and I fulfilled the requirements on that security. And so what ended up happening 2 months later at the level of the Supreme Court was questionable at best, right? But on the other hand, here we are, and I have this index. This index, by the way, looks very different than the index that was put out by the Department of Defense in early 2019, right? So around what, February? I believe it was. February of 2019, the Department of Defense put out its own 24-point index related to Afghanistan. So I want to thank you all for all the hard work you've done. I am going to go, I have that in my evidence, my backup, and I'm going to compare what I already had for going on 2 years now. Actually, a year and a half, no. So would it be a year and a half? I've had that in my evidence for a year and a half. I just found this today. I'm going to compare the two because it's possible that both commitments have been filled, right? And that both obligations have actually been fulfilled, but that this artificial and illegal surveillance regime has kept people that otherwise could have been cooperating from being able to communicate, which brings up the question of motive and intent, right? So thank you very much for all the hard work you've done in attempting to sabotage my pension fund. In the end, were I to have been apprised up front of what the requirements were in order for me to be eligible for that pension, I never would have accepted the job, right? And so I'm very sorry if you actually did what I told you you needed to do in order to qualify to get a degree in my program, which was to actually burn your final project. If you actually, in order to meet the specifications I put on your performance within the program, having me as your academic advisor, to actually take your final project and burn it, I apologize because I am actually not accepting anything that would authorize me to provide you with accreditation, even if you fulfill the requirements, right? Too bad the Treaty on Open Skies is no longer in effect. We could have made our own certificates, right? See you soon.